now seeing a generation of boys, in particular, who think that sexual violence is perfectly normal, who have effectively bonded with what they are seeing on screen, not with the woman in front of them.
Hello, I'm Miriam Cates. You're watching GB News Originals, and I've got a very special guest with me today, Jo Bartosch, who's an author and campaigner, and she's got a book coming out very, very shortly, Pornography, due to be released on the 31st of October. And of course, she's a well-known journalist too. Now, Jo, thank you for joining me today. And our discussion is going to be on the Online Safety Act. And as I'm sure viewers will be aware, certain aspects of this Online Safety Act have been implemented over the last week with quite extraordinary controversy, haven't they, Jo? Can you describe to me some of the reaction that you've seen online to the implementation of this law?
Yeah, I mean, it is quite extraordinary. I think to see Owen Jones on the same side as Nigel Farage says quite a lot. And there's been a real panic around censorship, around concerns about sort of not being able to see footage, particularly, I know, of writing in leads. And some of this, I think, is valid. You know, I think the way tech companies have chosen to enforce the legislation is questionable. I do think it's potentially within their ability to be a bit more selective about what they chose to censor. Everybody knows what pornography is. It seems a bit odd to me that that some of the world's greatest technologists, who, you know, Elon Musk, for example, who wants to colonize Mars, suddenly can't find it within his ability to work out when a grooming gang victim is giving testimony and that deserves to be aired, and when something is pornographic. I think there might be something potentially um, deliberate going on there, because I know obviously this is about the balance between governments and technologists, and that's always been a matter of contention.
Now, Jo, I think both of us agree that the Online Safety Act is far from perfect and there are many uncertainties in it. I think one of the big mistakes that Parliament made was to give so much power to Ofcom to decide on the secondary legislation, on the kind of guidance for the technology firms. Actually, Parliament should have specified very clearly what is pornography, what is violence, exactly what protections children need. Of course, that would have been better. So there's a big caveat here that the Online Safety Act is a long way from perfect, and there certainly are threats in there for this government and future government in terms of clamping down on freedom of expression. But I really want to focus on the idea, the principle of age verification, the principle that children should not be able to watch pornography, violence, suicide content, self-harm content that we know is doing them great damage, and that the trade-off for stopping children seeing those things is that adults have to prove their age in order to be able to watch it. Now, of course, this already happens in the offline world. If you want to go and see an 18 certificate at a cinema, you may be challenged to prove your age. If you want to buy alcohol, you will have to prove your age. This principle is a long-standing one in our offline world. Why do you think people are equating age verification online with censorship?
Yeah, I mean, I am a little bit skeptical again about why people are so reluctant to accept what we accept in every other aspect of our lives. I mean, it really ought not to be controversial to expect somebody to prove that they're over 18 before they see content that we know shapes the way that they think. We know it informs sexual scripts, and we know it's having a real world effect. Um, for example, we know that most children don't actually go directly onto pornography sites. They're exposed to it through Twitter. So 41% of children who come across pornography for the first time come across it on Twitter. So, you know, clearly something needs to be done. How they've chosen to do that, as I say, as we both agree, is questionable. But at the same time, this isn't a controversial proposal or law, and I think it's very frustrating. I feel like there's a certain blindness. I feel like, to be honest, I feel like it's powerful men being a bit upset that their toys are being taken away, and yeah, I think we've seen sort of 200,000 signatories for a petition calling for the repeal of the act, which is strange. I mean, that doesn't seem entirely organic to me. That seems like something that is being pushed. Um, and, you know, when you look at the people who developed the online world itself, very many of them were libertarian men from the US, and I think they all had quite I'm rather fond of them actually. I think they had a sort of a libertarian hippie ethos that was quite interesting, but they didn't really develop it with children in mind. And now it is where most people spend most of their time. I mean, you look at how long people spend on their phones, how long they spend online. It is as real, particularly to the digital natives. It's as real to people now as the real world. So if we have laws in the real world, why on earth wouldn't we have similar rules to govern our online experiences?
Do you want to save a boatload of cash this summer, wherever you have a trip planned? The one thing you're going to need is access to the internet and on the go. And you can do that easily with Saily. Hit the link in the description to get 15% off your first eSIM plan ready for your trip so you can browse to your heart's content. Saily gets you a local SIM card you can use when traveling so you don't have to pay those crazy roaming fees just to send a message or check the latest news. Now, they've got plans in over 160 countries, 8 regions, so pretty much everywhere, wherever you're going, they'll be able to make sure you're connected. So how does it work? All you've got to do is this. Hit the link in the description to download the app. It will work on iOS or Android. Buy a plan. You can choose an amount of data and time frame that suits you best. And then just install the eSIM on your phone. When you land at your holiday destination, you can activate your plan instantly. And if that wasn't enough, Saily eSIMs only ever have to be installed once. So when you go on your next trip, you just buy a plan for a new country, turn that eSIM back on, and boom, you're back watching me on GB News. I'll be using a Saily SIM on my next holiday because it's actually faster than some of the hotel Wi-Fis. You can get unlimited data if you want, so you can scroll away to your heart's content. And when you leave the hotel, you don't have to do that annoying thing of Wi-Fi hopping because you've got constant connectivity wherever you go. And they've got 24/7 support as well and a full refund policy if your eSIM isn't compatible. So get sorted for your next trip. Download Saily using the link in the description below. And if you use the code NEWS at checkout, you'll get an exclusive 15% discount on us. So click the link, download Saily, and use the code NEWS at checkout.
Yes, I think that's a really good point, actually, that we've almost created this carve out, this exceptionalism for the online world. But whilst our way of interacting with each other has changed radically over the past 20 years, the human brain, the human psyche, human biology has not changed at all. And the way that our brains react to those kind of images, to the changing culture, is no different than it was 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, even 10,000 years ago. And so why should not those same human principles that have applied for all that time applied online? But I want to particularly talk about pornography. By some estimates, a third of the internet is pornography. And some people think it's a private matter, but some of the stats that we've seen around, for example, the number of children committing sexual abuse against other children, the number of women being strangled during sex, which is a huge proportion. I think 40% of under 35s compared to just 5 or 6% of older women. So huge change in culture directly as a result of porn. Why is porn not a private matter?
Yeah, I mean, I believe it's a threat to the whole of humanity. I mean, I really feel it's something that is underestimated. But when you have, it's proven to be addictive in terms of how it functions on the brain. It's very much similar to drugs or alcohol or any other substance. The neural pathways it forms are reinforced in a similar sort of way. And when you effectively, when you masturbate to pornography and when you orgasm to pornography, that creates a feedback loop. And we are now seeing a generation of boys, in particular, who think that sexual violence is perfectly normal, who have effectively bonded with what they are seeing on screen, not with the woman in front of them. And we are seeing, I think, Lily Phillips and Bonnie Blue are very good examples of young women who saw pornography. Both of them saw it when they were 12, and they have gone on, obviously, to understand themselves in a pornified way. And I think that's something that is affecting everyone, the whole of society, the whole of how we interact. So the Burton Review, which came out earlier this year, found that, yes, 38% of young women had been strangled during sex, 34% had been gagged, and 59% had been slapped. And we are seeing I mean, this would have been recognised as standard sexual violence only a generation ago, yet now it's just an intrinsic normal part of sex because our sexual scripts are being shaped by online content. And you've got Elon Musk again, for example, going on about the decline in the birth rate. Well, that's going to continue. uh, and if men continue to sort of form their sexual scripts, indeed women, from pornography, because it is so fundamentally dehumanizing. I mean, there was one, just to give you an example of somebody I interviewed for the book, one young woman called Mila. So she was 12 when she first saw pornography. And she wasn't looking for it. It was a pop-up when she was looking for, she was researching Taylor Swift, as it happens. And a pop-up came up and it took her to a pornographic site. And she ended up, she was quite traumatized by it and she was disgusted by it. And what we know about how trauma works is you then often seek out the same sort of content in order to make sense of it. And all this it's kind of a very primitive survival strategy, which is why you end up with so many traumatized women in the pornography industry. And now we have a generation who have effectively been traumatized. Now, this young woman ended up in the sex industry herself. So she developed an addiction to pornography. She needed more and more extreme content. And then she ended up in prostitution. And I think that's a very familiar pattern. So, if you look at outside of OnlyFans, if you look at most pornography sites, there is some research that suggests the vast majority of women who go into the industry are traumatized. So, what people are watching when they look at this is traumatized people, and they are then creating another generation, if you like, of victims. So it's a really sort of unpleasant business model that sucks people in. And I think, again, what isn't understood properly, we all understand that when it comes to social media more widely, there's an army of technologists out there trying to get our attention, trying to hack our brains, trying to make us click, trying to make us release dopamine. And that exact same thing is happening with pornography. So it's not like it's an individual choice. This is an army of people who are using very sort of well-developed algorithms to target and to lure us into ever more extreme content. And that is changing what it is to be human.
And of course, big tech are profiting from this enormously. I mean, the porn industry itself is worth billions of dollars a year. The tech industry as a whole is worth trillions of dollars. And lots of people who would call themselves conservatives are extremely skeptical about the power and the motives of the big state, the power and the motives of big pharmaceuticals, the power and the motives of global bodies like the EU and the UN, and very, very nervous about the power that those organizations have, and rightly so. And yet when it comes to big tech and social media in particular, they seem to suspend that skepticism and almost believe that big tech is on the side of free speech, which seems very unlikely to me. I mean, big tech is on the side of big tech.
But of course it is, yeah. And I mean, I think if they were honest with themselves, their motivation might be that, as I say, pornography is addictive, and the chances are they may well find themselves addicted to pornography and finding an
Well,
excuse
I'm
to.
sure there are some people like that, but I think there are people who are genuinely passionate about maintaining free speech. And I think, you and I would absolutely agree with that, and that the free exchange of ideas and freedom of expression is crucial to a democracy. And there are threats to that freedom of expression. But I think what seems to be happening is that perhaps the tech industry cynically have convinced people that the ability to post anything and everything online and for anybody anywhere, including children, to see that is free speech. Whereas that's not our tradition in this country. That's not the Western tradition. In fact, we've had very, very strong laws around obscenity and even censorship laws that are tied to our religious heritage, even if that's not practiced now. And that's our tradition, actually, is keeping the public sphere free of obscenity. That's our tradition in this country, not the ability to publish anything that you want.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the sort of the fetishization, if you like, of freedom of speech is in part a US export. I mean, I think it's, obviously tech companies are based in the US, and I think that understanding, which was shaped, I think, during the 80s and 90s when you had the porn wars and the sort of the Rachel McKinnon's the ordinances and Catherine McKinnon rather the ordinances and there's clearly been a long tradition in the US of melding together essentially content which dehumanises women and girls and is horrendously exploitative with some sort of notion of freedom of speech. I would argue actually that it is a threat to freedom of speech because, I know, for example, every time I speak out about pornography, I don't get threatened by pornography. And increasingly we are seeing nudifying apps and sort of ways to humiliate women and girls and to shut them up, which is sort of pornographic in tone in nature. So I think actually it is a tool to suppress freedom of speech, not about freedom of speech itself.
Now, one reasonable argument that I think people have given against the Online Safety Act and how it's been implemented is a lack of trust in the tech companies when looking at how you would prove your age. So people would say, yes, agree in principle that children should not be able to watch pornography, that they should not be able to watch violence, and therefore that in principle it's a good idea to have age verification. But why do I want to give my details, let's say my driving license, my passport, my date of birth, my biometrics to these big tech companies to prove my age? That's not a safe thing to do. What would you say to that?
Oh yeah, I totally agree, but they're doing it already. I mean, the fact is they're doing it every time they go online. There is a data trail. We all that's kind of, nothing is free. That's why. Um, so the data is already there. It might be anonymized, but it's there. And yeah, I think I can understand why people are anxious about it. But for example, to get onto Pornhub now, all you need is an email address. It's not like they're sort of scanning your irises. However, I think there's sort of there are genuine questions about what happens to our data online, and I think that's legitimate. But I don't think most people are even aware of how much data they give up just from having a presence online.
Yes, and if you have a conversation about toothpaste with your friend, the next time you go on your phone, you're being served adverts for
Yeah.
toothpaste. So, like you say, the tech companies know absolutely everything about us. And as you said, Elon Musk wants to send people to Mars. It's not beyond the realms of possibility to create third-party age verification where nobody stores the details. But like showing your driving license to a nightclub bouncer, there's an one-off check that you are the age you say you are. That must be possible. Now, we've talked a lot about pornography, and I think the vast majority of people are agreed that children should not watch pornography. But the problem with the Online Safety Act is that it doesn't particularly define very well the other kinds of material that children shouldn't see, and some of this is violence. Now, there's one particular controversy this week, which was that a brilliant, in my opinion, Conservative MP, Katie Lamb, gave a very, very powerful speech in Parliament about grooming gangs some time ago, and she described graphically in detail what happened to some of those poor victims. Some of them were 12 and 13, and sexually what they were forced to do. Now, that is absolutely appropriate speech for Parliament. Of course, parliamentarians need to know. But since the implementation of the Act, it's not been possible to view her speech without providing age verification. Now, some people have called this censorship. What do you think to that?
Yeah, I mean, I can appreciate that's a difficult point. I actually don't think, I mean, obviously it's a matter of speech, but I don't think it's entirely unreasonable to expect somebody to prove that they're over 18 before listening to that. I mean, I think, yes, it isn't content that has been designed essentially to induce an orgasm, so it's not pornographic. But I also think actually, yes, it probably would be distressing and cause harm to children. So I'm not entirely opposed to suggesting that people perhaps ought to prove their age before accessing that.
Mm. No, I would agree with you. I would not want my children to know the details of what happened to those grooming gangs. And I know, for example, parents whose children have been traumatized by being taught in primary school by their teachers what rape is. And now there is an argument for teaching children about child abuse in order to help them to recognize it. But actually, what you end up doing is traumatizing the majority instead of addressing the problems of a minority. And I would agree with you. Why should a child be able to access that speech? But it's interesting where this line between censorship and free speech is drawn. Just a final point really about the bill, the Act more broadly. When it was first brought before Parliament, it really was a dreadful piece of legislation, and there were a lot of sections in it talking about content that was legal but harmful. In other words, content that might be offensive or slightly distasteful, but was not in any sense legal. And there was an attempt originally to actually crack down and ban that content. Now, fortunately, a lot of MPs at the time, we were able to get rid of it. But nevertheless, there still are some tensions here between what Ofcom might think is harmful and what actually the law says. What do you think about the role of Ofcom in enforcing this legislation?
To be honest, I think Ofcom are a deeply flawed organisation. I think Melanie Dawes, I know, has, yeah, well, particularly when it comes to some of the decisions they've made around something else that I'm interested in, which I think is inherently linked to pornography, which is trans ideology. I know that she's taken a very partisan line on that. And I think, yes, whenever you have these sort of quangos that aren't quite accountable, you end up with people's agendas getting pushed. So yeah, I think there are genuine questions that need to be asked about, is Ofcom the right body to be enforcing this? Um, I know the British Board of Film Classification have also taken on a role, and I think perhaps that makes more sense, because if you are effectively laying out what is acceptable to show in a film, then I think the same should obviously apply to the online world. So yeah, I think there are legitimate questions about Ofcom's involvement.
Mm. Well, Jo, thank you for an absolutely fascinating discussion. Really appreciate you coming on. And I will just say again that both of us agree there are many flaws with the Online Safety Act. And I think both of us would repeal it and make it much more narrowly about protecting children. Is that fair, Jo?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But nevertheless, protecting children has to be a very important part of this. Jo Bartosch, thank you so much for your time.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for watching GB News Originals.